greatly appreciate that. And then whenever you want, I will share the screen and share your slides.
Yeah, whatever you think is best. I don't know how you want to do that. It'll be the highlight of the day.
Well, it will be the highlight. Listen, people have rearranged their schedules to be here today to see you. I just want you to know that.
Yeah.
So here's your slideshow. Do you want me just to sort of forward it? Can you see it?
I can see it.
Yeah. So this is the introductory slide. Do you want to talk a little bit about, I don't know, your biography? I mean, we all kind of know who you are, but can you introduce yourself?
Well, sure. And you'll stop me if I'm going on too long, because having been cooped up here by myself for the last 6 months, any opportunity to talk, I take full advantage of and can go on and on. So stop me.
That's good.
So I probably know many of the students today. I retired in July as the department chair. I've been at Eastern for almost 37 years. I'm a clinical psychologist by training, child clinical primarily. And I guess I've always had an interest in art. I was a music major for most of my undergraduate career, so kind of the arts have always interested me. And visual arts in particular have interested me for a long time. I've taken every art history class EKU ever offered. I took art history classes in college when I could. So I've always had an interest in looking at art and appreciated art, and I enjoyed going to museums. But about 10-ish or so years ago, I decided I was going to try drawing and painting. I have no special talent for it. I wasn't one of those kids who drew all the time and, you know, was the artist in the high school yearbook or anything. And I truly have no particular talent for it. But it was something I thought I would enjoy, and sure enough, I took a couple of drawing classes at Eastern a long time ago, and then didn't really do anything with it for a while. And then, as I said, maybe not even 10 years ago, probably 6 or 7 years ago, I took it up on a more serious sort of way. I got interested in something that's called urban sketching. I won't bore you with the big detail, with the excessive details, but it's this kind of international movement, kind of a web-based organization all over the world. Thousands and thousands of people participate. And the basic gist of it is people who are interested in urban sketching are going out into urban settings, cities, villages, etc., and kind of documenting their surroundings. So drawing and sketching and painting buildings and urban landscapes and, you know, places where people are in cities. And then they post these sketches, these images on this Urban Sketcher website. So that really caught my interest. And that's what really kind of got me fired up about participating in art again. I started going to some Urban Sketcher, believe it or not, Urban Sketcher workshops, and there's a big international Urban Sketcher symposium every year. I've been to one in Portugal and one in Chicago. And anyway, it kind of combined my interest in travel with this new interest I'd kind of developed in painting and sketching. And I have been obsessed with it ever since. I sketch something almost every day. It's an unusual day for me if I don't. When I was still working at Eastern, everybody knew that from about 9:15 until 10:30, 10:45, I was at Purdy's coffee shop every day, and I went there specifically to sketch. So I had a little sketchbook that I took with me and my little watercolor set, and I sat at a particular table at Purdy's, and I sketched every day. Sometimes I was sketching the people around me or what I could see in Purdy's, or sometimes I'd sit by a window and sketch the street scenes. But mostly at Purdy's, I was sketching from photos. And again, it was just kind of for me, it was just something I needed to do every day. And it was practice, and wasn't quite urban sketching, but it was close enough. And I make a point in my spare time of going out anywhere I can and sketching on location. I've sketched every building on EKU's campus. I have sketched that steam plant over there on University Drive, you know, the big smokestack that belches out something every now and then. I've probably done 30 sketches of that place from various angles. So anyway, that's my sketching story.
So what is your process exactly? So does a place have to speak to you in order for it to be sketched, or how do you make that decision? And then what's your process after that?
Well, yeah, I guess speak to me is a good description. So when I'm just doing the little sketches from photos at Purdy's, and even here at home, you know, since we've been stuck in our houses, I'll just get on the Google and look for, you know, I'll Google anything from abandoned buildings to French villages to something that just sounds interesting until I spot an image that I think would be fun to sketch. I've been studying composition here for the past couple of months pretty seriously. So now I'm looking for, you know, patterns of light and dark and photos that I can create a good composition from. So there's some of it is just looking for what will make a good, interesting sketch. But when I'm traveling, and again, that's something I like to do a lot. So if I'm traveling to some other, you know, another country, to Paris or Amsterdam or London or Florence, wherever, I'm not necessarily looking for the iconic sites, the Eiffel Tower or some other famous thing. I'm just, again, looking for something that I just think makes an interesting sketch. So I have lots of sketches of telephone poles and alleys and falling down buildings. And I was sitting in Paris one time, sitting on the sidewalk, sketching what for most people would look like just one of 1,000 similar looking apartment buildings, really. So I'm sitting on my little camp stool looking at this building across the street and sketching it. Maybe half a block down the street is a beautiful park, a really well-known picturesque park in Paris. So I'm sitting there sketching this everyday building that I thought was really cool because of some architectural details that were there and some kind of iron railings. And a woman came up and was standing there watching me for a while, and she said, why are you doing this? You need to go down the street. There's this beautiful park, beautiful scenes you can paint. Don't paint this. So anyway, that's my process. I look around for something that I think would make an interesting sketch or just captures my interest. And I do spend a lot of time wandering around looking for the right place to be. And I now work in ink. So I typically don't do little pencil sketches first. I start out in ink. I've noticed that when I start out sketching, when I first took up sketching, I would do pencil sketches so that I could kind of correct things and get the perspective right and all that. And what I realized is I was getting all caught up in fussing over these foolish little details that really didn't matter. And it became a chore, really. I tend to be a little obsessive compulsive about things. So that was just feeding right into it. So I don't sketch and I don't do pre-sketches in pencil anymore. I start directly in ink. I use a fountain pen. And I'll do most of the sketch in ink, and then I follow up with watercolor. I have a little watercolor kit that I carry around with me, and I paint over the ink lines with the watercolor. Another thing that another really practical concern for me is, again, I'm sketching in urban places, so there's lots of people around and lots of traffic and commotion. I have to find a place where I can sit, for hours. It takes me sometimes hours to do these sketches. So I've got to be kind of out of the way, preferably someplace cool, not out in the blazing sun, not someplace where I'm going to be in pedestrian's way. So that's another consideration. I have a little camp stool, I don't know, maybe it's a foot high, maybe a little higher, that folds up. I carry that with me. I park that thing on the sidewalk somewhere, usually with my back against the building, and sketch and paint.
Do you think the fact that you've moved away from doing pencil pre-sketching right to the ink, that says something about your skills?
Probably not, no. Maybe a little. I certainly feel a little more confident than I did 6 years ago when I started doing this. But again, it was really a matter of doing those pencil sketches and erasing and futzing with it, endlessly. Wasn't as much fun. It wasn't as spontaneous a process. It, wasn't quite as creative a process. It was laborious, kind of fussing. And it's just, I don't enjoy it as much. I like to do the pen thing. And of course, what that means is there are going to be errors. The sketches aren't going to be perfect, and that's all okay. It's taken me a while to get to that point where I can say it's okay. And sometimes it's really not, but I get over it. But yeah, I think it just makes it a more spontaneous, fun process.
It seems also like it's consistent with the flow idea that, sometimes when you get too obsessed or you get too detailed, that, your skills feel like they're overwhelmed. And so you're not in the flow. So it sounds like you're kind of allowing yourself now these days to just not worry so much or obsess so much, but also sort of get right into the flow, the thing that really feels good about this process.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. That whole business of the balance between the challenge of the task and the skills, I think is part of it for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do feel like my skills are at a higher level so that I can accept more, I can deal with greater challenges. I certainly see myself avoiding trying some sketches because the challenge exceeds my skill level. I know I'm not going to be able to make it work, and just not in the mood to fool with that.
Yeah. So how about if we take a look at some of your pictures? I'm just going to forward the slides. Okay, here we go. How about this one? I hope you don't mind, but I had to make them a little bit larger. I hope I didn't make them too weird or.
It's hard to make them any weirder than they already are. Yeah, I will say this. I think I mentioned this to you, Dr. Moore. There are sort of two categories of sketches that I sent to Dr. Moore for today's talk. There are, like this one, there are these typical urban sketches. So you can see this is a neighborhood in Lisbon, Portugal. And I'm sketching this building, I'm observing this building, these buildings in front of me. Again, I'm sitting on my little camp stool on a sidewalk sketching this thing. There's another category of things that I've been doing lately. There's sort of abstract paintings because, again, I can't get out of the house very much. I'm stuck here. So I've been exploring these kind of abstracty painting sketches as well. They're a little odd, but I kind of like them. This is a good example of being in the flow. One of the things that is supposedly part of flow is you get so caught up in the task, you're kind of not aware of things going on around you. That whole business of our attentional capacity, and if all of our attentional resources are focused intently on capturing this scene and getting the line work the way I want it to be, there's no attention left to attend to things going on around you. So in this case, again, I was sitting on a sidewalk in a really narrow, sort of a weird part of town. Not that you can see, this is not a touristy part of Lisbon. It's a sort of a poorer, more rundown neighborhood that just caught my attention. Anyway, the important thing is there was this, what on first glance looked like a fountain, but it turns out it was a place where people urinated. And it was about 3 feet from me. And I didn't even notice it until the end when I was kind of packing up my bags and, I'd stopped sketching. I was getting ready to leave, and this overwhelming stink of urine was just, and I never noticed it for the probably hour and a half that I was sitting there doing that sketch.
Oh my gosh. The opportunities for more interesting pictures. That was missed, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Thank God I didn't have to.
Yeah, that's a great story. I'm gonna do the next one. Okay, what about this one?
Yeah, this is in Paris. This is an interesting. I don't know how flowy interesting this is, but so this is a elevated kind of walkway. It used to be a elevated train thing in Paris. So I did this the last time I was in Paris, and I was sitting across the street, across this really wide major street in Paris, sketching this scene. And again, what attracted me to it was the composition. It was that sort of dark mass, the bridge supports, and the roadbed there, and the lighter area in the back. Anyway, I'm sitting there, and I sort of noticed that there are a bunch of people, increasing numbers of people walking down the middle of the street. The traffic has stopped, and there's pedestrians out there in this major street. Anyway, and I start hearing this loud racket, from afar, and it's getting closer and closer. Turns out I was there for, I don't know if everybody remembers, but there was the yellow jackets, the yellow vests protest going on in Paris a couple of years ago, last summer before this. Protesting social injustice, inequities, income, that sort of thing. Jeune something or other. Anyway, it was this giant protest march came marching past me with people shouting and police presence, and kind of exciting.
That is exciting. It's historical.
Yes, I was there.
You were there, indeed. By the way, folks, if anybody has a question for Dr. Brubaker, I want you just to chime in. Just interrupt, chime in. This is a free-for-all. And Dr. Winslow, you too. If you would like ask a question. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting questions to ask you, but I want to make sure everybody gets an opportunity to ask a question, or if a particular scene, because they've not seen these slides before, these pictures before. So let's move on to the next one.
Yeah, this is another building in Paris. This is yet another example of being unaware of what was going on around me. I'm sitting in across, that building is across a big sort of plaza area in Paris. So between where I'm sitting on my little camp stool and that building, those gates that you see, is probably 100 yards or so. And there are tons of people there, and I'm just oblivious to them when this is going on. There are people, I didn't realize it until I kind of took a break. I was so caught up in this, and then you sort of stop for a minute and get out of the flow, I guess. And I realized there are maybe 30 people milling around right behind me. Some of them are watching me. It's sort of, you attract attention when you do this, but others were just kind of back there. When I sat down, there was nobody in that plaza. It was just me. It was early on a Sunday morning, I think. But unbeknownst to me, this crowd had amassed behind me when I was doing this sketch. That's all I got on that one.
Well, so I want to, Blair, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah. So when you get taken out of flow and you're doing one of your sketches, do you find that it's easy to kind of get back into it, or does it take a time and some sort of process to get back into that?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a process, but it probably does take a little time. What happens not infrequently when I'm doing these kinds of sketches out on the street, people will interrupt. People will come by and look over my shoulder and say, "Are you an artist?" And, "Oh, I wish I could draw like that," or "This is terrible, you should stop doing this right away." Nobody has ever said that to me. They're all very kind. But yeah, you're sort of ripe for being interrupted, sitting out there on a little camp stool with your watercolors on the ground and your sketchbook and your hat. And yeah, so that certainly kind of gets you out of the flow, but I guess I can get back into it pretty quickly. Because again, I get focused on whatever it is I'm trying to do in the sketch.
That's a great question. I love that question, Blair. I'm curious to know, Dr. Brubaker, do you feel like it calms you, like after you've gotten out of the flow experience, you feel sort of bodily changes in terms of it being calming or relaxing or even therapeutic?
All those things. Yeah, it's many people have said this. It's almost a cliche, but it is kind of like it's almost a form of meditation, a weird form of meditation, I guess. But yeah, it really is relaxing and calming. The one sort of thing that interrupts that or interferes with that is, again, it kind of goes back to this divided attention thing. So, you know, here, again, think of where I am. I'm sitting on a little 1-foot camp stool with my knees up in my face practically and hunched over this sketchbook. And it's generally not a comfortable place. Oftentimes it's hot, you know, it's noisy. I've been sitting in this little cramped up position for, you know, hour, 2 hours, sometimes longer. And I'm completely unaware of that during the process. But then when it's over and, you know, we're kind of packing up, I realize that my muscles are cramped. I'm sweating like a pig. I'm dying of hunger. I'm thirsty. You know, I was in Portugal again. You saw that painted that sketch before. I was in Portugal one year when they had the worst heat wave in 1,000 years or something. It was 107 degrees on a regular basis. And I was out there sketching on those days, you know, in 107 plus degrees. And while I was sketching, it was just oblivious to it, completely unaware of it. But as soon as I stopped, it hit me. It's 107 degrees and I'm just melting out there. Wow. So yeah, it is a calming experience. But again, you also come back to reality pretty quickly with the cramped muscles and the sweating and the thirst.
What about in terms of content here? I mean, we've seen some rather, you said modest neighborhoods. You said even kind of deprived or poor neighborhoods. And then that one before this, the area in Paris, you said was just kind of more of an industrial or inner city area. But this is a very regal looking building. What was it about this particular building that really spoke to you?
You know, you can't really see it very well on that sketch, but it was really that gate in the front, that iron railing with all that gold work on it really caught my attention. Also, there was the really practical matter of, there was a really nice spot for me to sit in the shade with my back against something. Well, sort of my back against kind of a raised fountain-y thing. So part of it was, this is a good place I can sit. And the other part was I really liked that iron work on there. Plus it's a cool looking building and I like the shadows. It's another thing I look for is interesting shadows. And you can sort of see up there under that I don't know what you call that part that sticks out in the building, but under there's kind of a line of shadows.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just an interesting image for me.
Yeah, beautiful. I love all the flourishes on the gate.
Yeah, yeah, it was cool.
Beautiful. Okay.
Well, this is a good example of a completely ordinary building. It's a hospital in the neighborhood near where we stayed in Paris. So not even a famous hospital, it's just the local, the local hospital. I became really interested in those chimney pots, I guess they're called, up on the top of those roofs. And you see it frequently in Paris, those little orange, like clay things on chimneys. This was also a case where I was interested in the shadows. So that's how I ended up with that, doing that sketch. I was sitting there among a bunch of, I guess they were maybe medical students or like X-ray technician students. Across the street from that hospital is a medical school, essentially. And students would come out on their break and smoke cigarettes and hang around outside on the sidewalk where I was sketching. They didn't talk to me, but they were there.
Very cool. Is this the hospital that was it's kind of famous? It's kind of a famous, or is that another landmark in Paris?
Yeah, this is not a famous hospital at all. This is just a local place. In fact, when students get sick in the study abroad program, you know, they get allergies or some other sick, this is the hospital we always take them to. The emergency room is just to the right there. So yeah, it's nothing. It wasn't the fame of the building, the status of the building. It was just the image that I wanted to sketch.
Okay.
Is this the hospital that was right by the FIOP last summer?
Yeah, if you leave the FIOP and walk north, you know, toward Notre Dame and everything, yeah, it would be on your right there.
Yeah, I thought it was familiar.
Yeah, I'm sure you saw it.
So Rachel, do you have any good Dr. Brubaker stories?
No, she doesn't.
Every night at dinner, he'd always sit by us and he'd try to get my food. He's like, "You gonna eat this?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm gonna eat your dessert."
Well,
Yeah, I can't lie. That is true.
I wouldn't make it up.
No.
He's consistent. He does that on every continent.
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent.
Well, this is a famous building, Tivoli Gardens in Copenhagen. Not much to say about this really. Again, it was just an interesting building. I was sitting on the sidewalk across the street. I did have a large contingent of, I think they were Japanese tourists. Turns out where I was sitting was the meeting place for a tour group. So I'm sitting there minding my own business, sketching this, and all of a sudden there's this crowd of Japanese tourists sort of hovering around, taking pictures of me, taking pictures of the sketch, taking pictures of me with them, selfies. It's really pretty amazing. I'm not a particularly sociable person, but you just have to kind of get over that when you're out there doing this in public. It just attracts attention. But they were very nice and complimentary, and it was fun.
Do they ever make the assumption that you're a starving artist and they need to pay you?
Yes, I was in New Orleans, in Jackson Square. If you've been to New Orleans, you guys know there are some, panhandlers there, and there's some street artists there and musicians, and everybody has their hat out on the sidewalk. And there was a woman who tried to give me money. I was sitting on the ground there sketching something, I don't remember what, all my stuff around there. And she stopped and said, "Oh, this is nice. Are you here every day? Where can I give you this, this money?" And I should have taken it. I should have put my hat out there and taken it, but I didn't.
What
Oh, that's
mental
too bad.
illness do you have? That's
Really. What possesses you to do this?
Well, that was nice of her. Very nice.
It was very nice. I have had only pleasant encounters with people doing this.
That's lovely. That's lovely. Do people ask you about what you do in your real life, or do they not go that far?
No, they don't care about that. No,
Okay.
I don't think anybody's ever asked me that. I did have a guy, I was sketching in Paris again, and I was sitting on a bench, and some guy and his son, sort of, I could sense them inching closer and closer and closer. And the guy finally asked me if I spoke English. Turns out he was an American. He wanted to take a picture of me sketching because he said it was this iconic, image of Paris, artists in Paris sketching. I pointed out to him I was an artist sort of from Kentucky, but that didn't matter. The image was still good for him.
I love it. That's great. You could fulfill his fantasy of taking a picture of an artist in Paris.
Yeah, I guess. Sort of sad.
That's wonderful.
This is another one where you're just sort of oblivious to what's going on around you. I did this sketch sitting in the rain. I was actually sitting against a construction fence, and I mean right against it. My knees were up against this chain link fence around a construction site, looking at this building sort of in the distance beyond the construction site. And I was sort of looking through there were these big panels hung on the chain link fence, to screen off what was going on behind there. So I'm sitting in the spot where I could look between this narrow, opening between the panels with my face up against this chain link fence in the rain. It started raining while I was doing the sketch, and I didn't want to stop. In fact, it didn't even register that it was raining until it started dribbling on the page. I was definitely in the flow there. And you can imagine the people who are walking by, what they're thinking with this old guy and his little painting set up there with his face against the fence in the rain. I think I provided many stories for people that evening when they got home, talked to their families.
I don't know if I hope I didn't distort it by making it larger, but the perspective is interesting. It's almost like you're looking up at it, but you've got a sort of a broader view of it. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, that is, it's kind of 3-point perspective sort of going on there. So it does, you know, those parallel lines converge at a point way above that building, just like, you know, parallel lines converge on the horizon. If you're looking at a railroad track, it looks as though the parallel lines converge. It's the same thing when you're looking at convergence, parallel lines that go up above you. So I'm sitting kind of looking up at that building, and those lines do converge. In fact, I have underrepresented the degree of convergence there. If I had drawn exactly what I was seeing, those lines probably would have converged even more. I typically don't do that because it just bothers me and it looks weird to me. So sometimes I minimize the amount of convergence.
Interesting. Are you trying to show the haze by making the building in the background kind of more of a ghost kind of? I mean, you didn't really fill it in. Is that supposed to show the haze or the sort of the dreariness of the day?
Kind of. I mean, you can see from that sky there, it was a cloudy, rainy. It had been sort of a cloudy, dreary day the whole time. Yeah, it does sort of suggest that that building is kind of in the haze. It also is an attempt to focus, you know, to move your focus to the building and not to the surrounding stuff. So it's a way of highlighting the focal point of the sketch, which is that tower there. If I'd been paying careful attention, I would have moved that whole tower over to the left a little bit. It's kind of too close to the middle, which is really not good composition. It should have been a little more to the left. Yeah, so again, not a particular, you know, tourist spot in Paris. It's an old observatory, not far from the FIAP, you know, in Paris, near the Luxembourg Gardens. This was a case where two things. What caught my eye were the shadows again. I really liked the shadows on that building. And I found what I thought was a great place to sketch. This building is kind of on a little cul-de-sac, which is really odd in Paris, but a little dead end, a little sort of circle there. And I've walked by it, you know, over the many times I taught in Paris. I've probably walked by this hundreds of times, and rarely is there anything going on down there. No people, no cars, no nothing. It's a dead end. There's a gate to keep you from getting into the observatory that's never open. So I sat down on my little stool in the middle of the cul-de-sac because it was the angle that I wanted. And within moments, a car comes into the cul-de-sac, and I'm not paying careful attention, but it's maybe 10 feet from me. It's kind of going forward and backward and forward and backward. Anyway, it turns out I parked myself in a place where they take student drivers to practice doing turns. So all morning, the whole time I'm there, you know, just 10 feet from me are these student drivers practicing their turns. It was a little unnerving because they were student drivers, and who knows when they were going to panic and hit the gas and drive over me. But again, it's this obliviousness to your surroundings that kind of allowed me to sit there. Yeah, I don't know what to say about this. This is a Purdy's sketch. So I have not been to Budapest, but this is one of the sketches I did in my little sketchbook at Purdy's.
Did you look it up on the computer, or what were you doing? What was the?
Yeah, I Google cities. I'd been thinking about traveling to Budapest, so it was kind of on my mind. So I Googled Budapest buildings or something and Google images and just looked for something interesting. What I liked on there were all those towers, sort of the little, you know, details on those towers kind of caught my eye. But that's definitely one of my Purdy sketches. I don't know what to say about that. That's from a photo.
Really? It says after Paul lunch.
It's Paul Wang, actually. It was Paul Wang is an urban sketcher whose work I really admire. It's really loose and colorful. He's really very good. And he had done a sketch of this building. And so he always, on his Instagram, he shows the photo and then he shows his sketches and actually the sketches in progress. So I kind of did this in the style of Paul Wang from the photo of this shop in Singapore, I think, is where he's from. So yeah, that was my Paul Wangian style sketch of that thing.
I don't know where I got lunch from, but somehow that just lunch. And I was like, oh, he had lunch with his friend Paul.
I wish.
Yeah.
Oh, so see, now we moved on to the abstracts. You can see it's a little, it's not quite the usual urban sketching thing here. So this is actually, there's a building, an old rundown barn on EKU's property. EKU has a sort of a natural area that the biology department uses for research, and they have cows out there. I think it's called Taylor Fork Creek or something. Anyway, back there along one of the paths, one of the roadways back through that farm area is this falling down barn with this little building attached to the side. It's kind of a metal building, so you can see the rust on the building. So this is a slightly abstracted version of that building. And this was horrifying. I'm sitting there on my little bench, my little stool in the middle of this field. And when I sat there, there was nobody with me. There was nobody in this field. The whole place looked deserted. But again, it kind of happened suddenly. I become aware of action movement behind me, and there's this whole herd of cows, really, really big, scary cows. And they're coming closer and closer to me. And I'm attempting, nice cows, hello, back off. I don't know what the hell I was thinking by talking to them. But it turns out I had seated myself next to the place where they're fed. There were all these bales of hay and some kind of watering thing. So what they were really, I was in their way. I was between them and their food, but they scared the hell out of me that day. And again, I didn't see them coming.
That is funny. Now I want to ask you I got a couple of questions, but I'm also going to invite students to ask questions. You had told me a funny story about being in Amsterdam, where you had a similar flow experience. Do you remember that story?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is hard to explain. So Amsterdam, everybody knows about the canals in Amsterdam. And generally along the sides of the canals, there are these narrow streets. You know, the canals are kind of in the middle of the streets. So I was sitting one day on a bench right on the edge of a canal in Amsterdam, and I was sketching this church that was across the canal. So the little bench I was sitting on was maybe 2 feet from a road, you know, with cars on it, a really narrow road. But I was also at a sort of a T intersection. So, you know, I was sitting on a road I was sitting next to a road that was running parallel to the canal that I was facing. But there was also a street kind of coming in at a T behind me. And again, these are really, really narrow, crowded streets. So I'm sitting there I was sitting on an actual bench sketching this thing and really caught up in it. It was this really intricate kind of clock towery thing on this church. And again, it's always the same thing. It's like all of a sudden, sort of snap out of this reverie or this sort of state of ecstasy that what's-his-name talks about. And I sense that there's something behind me. And I turn around, and I'm not exaggerating, within maybe 5 feet of me is this giant tour bus. You know, one of these really 2-story high giant buses that you see frequently in Europe, you know, 20 feet high. And what it was doing was trying to get out of that street that was running toward me, trying to make a right turn onto the street that was running behind me. And he wasn't able to make it in one turn. So he was kind of going back and forth, kind of gradually making that turn. And each time he came forward, he was just right behind my head. I'm not exaggerating, maybe 5 feet at the most. I was completely unaware of it until, again, it kind of hit me and something was going on behind me. There had been a woman sitting next to me on the bench, and she'd gotten up, probably because the bus scared the hell out of her, but she didn't warn me, she just laughed. Definitely in a flow state there.
Definitely. I want to come back to this picture. So it makes a whole lot of sense to me that this is an abandoned building. I mean, you can kind of see that. But what about all these abstract lines? What are those? I mean, and just explain that the whole image to us.
Yeah, I wish I could explain those lines. So some of it is, I was thinking about Cubism at the time and kind of looking at, you know, an image, a scene, a building in this case, from multiple perspectives at one time in the same sketch. So some of those things, it's hard to do when I can't point to them, but like toward the left of the main part of the painting, there's a little sort of triangular shape with vertical lines, you know, ink lines, and it's kind of gray. That's sort of another view of the siding of that building. That it was kind of on the side of the outbuilding, or the lean-to that was attached to the barn. So some of those things you can see are just images from other parts of the building that I've kind of moved into that part of the sketch. Same thing with that kind of stair-steppy thing over on the right side. That was actually someplace else on the building. But then there are also those sort of diagonal lines. They're sort of a rust color or indigo color that you see on there. I do those a lot on these abstract sketches, and they're really not from the building. There's just something about them that pleases me. So I will do one of these little abstract sketches without those lines are on, those come last. So I do into these sketches and I'm looking at it and I know it's just not right. And I just start putting these lines in there. There's no necessarily, you know, rhyme or reason or plan. I just put them where they seem to need to go. And I'm much happier with the sketch after I put them on. There's something about those lines just completes the sketch for me. It's a very strange thing. I've been actually thinking about that, why I'm so obsessed with those lines. It's just a thing. And you know, again, in this business of flow, it's not something that's planned. I don't, when I'm thinking about doing a sketch like this, I'm not thinking, okay, at the end, there's going to be a diagonal line here and there and another one there. It doesn't work that way. It just, at the end of the process, I just know where I want those lines to be. And there they go.
So
It's very odd.
If we were to put our psychology hat on and we were to think of this as a projective,
Uh-oh.
I think that would mean?
You're asking the wrong guy. I just don't know. I really have been thinking about it in general. I've been thinking about those lines. I'm just not sure what it is. I suspect it's not any deep psychological phenomena going on there. I think it's just more an aesthetic thing. I just think it looks better with those lines where they are.
So it's more about balance and it's not really about what you're trying to work out.
I think it is. I think it is about, I think it adds, I'm also, I like sketches that feel dynamic, you know, feel some activity, some motion, some movement. And I think those diagonal lines accomplish that. You know, kind of a sense of movement or dynamics.
Dynamics. Dr. Winslow, would you like to say something more about?
I was just thinking that same exact word, dynamics, when he was talking about it, and then he said the word, which makes me feel a little weird. But
great minds.
Well, but yeah, I mean, I bet, I don't know, but before you put the diagonal lines on, you said there was something missing, something not right about it. And I think it may be that in that case, what you've done is created a sketch that just doesn't have the action, you know, the force or the interest level that you wanted it, that you would like to have. So putting in those lines at least gives it something to wonder about, because as you asked Dr. Moore, you know, what's up with those diagonal lines? You know, so you're not thinking about it, but it's also just visually there's more action, there's more tension somehow, these intersecting lines. I think it gives the sketch just more interest level for a viewer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. They're just kind of, the sketches are just kind of blah until I put those lines on there. Just kind of blah, boring, bland.
Well, I don't know. I like them. Let's go on.
I like the lines.
I like the lines too. Let's go to the next one. Hold on here. Here we go. How about this one?
That one is terribly distorted, but it's
Sorry.
it's the lines again. I like the lines. In this case, the lines are, you know, objective. They're telephone poles. I said before that I really like drawing utility poles, and I think what it is, it's the lines again. It's those wires kind of going all over the place. I really enjoy drawing them. You can see how those the lines are kind of blurry. They look like they bled. I do that on purpose. I've been using this in some cases as water-soluble ink and water-soluble graphite. So, you know, on those sketches you were looking at from Paris and Lisbon and elsewhere, you know, those ink lines were clear, they were sharp, because they're done with ink that's not water-soluble. So you can put water on them and they don't bleed or run or anything. But I also like experimenting with this water-soluble ink and water-soluble graphite, so that the lines do kind of blur when they get wet. So the way this typically works with me is I put those lines on there, in this case with water-soluble ink, after the sketch is done, after the watercolor's on there, I put those extra lines on, and then I spray it with this little spray bottle I have that causes the water-soluble ink lines to blur like that, to run. And you can see around the edges, sort of, particularly on the right side there, there's a sort of a dark frame around the sketch a little bit. That's water-soluble graphite. And again, I spray it with a water bottle and it sort of explodes like that. And I think it's really cool. One of the things I really like about watercolor is the unpredictability. It's not like oil paint where you put the paint down and it stays there. With watercolor, you're not quite sure where it's going to go or what it's going to blend into or what it's going to run over onto. And that's, for me, that's part of the appeal. To me, it's this unpredictability of, you know, what's going to happen in the sketch painting.
Do you think it's part of that challenge, the challenge to your skills?
Yes, it is. And for me, the challenge, you know, one of the big challenges is not being so tightly controlled and not obsessing over the little details. You know, a challenge is to kind of be a little looser in the style that I'm drawing and sketching it. And that really takes a skill. You might think, well, it's easier to be kind of sloppy, but it's really not sloppiness, despite what it looks like. That kind of loosening up requires more skill, I think, than the more tightly controlled, obsessive little mark making. So yeah, it is. It's a greater challenge to do something like this for me, where you kind of let things go.
Do you think that's changed you?
Well, I don't know if it's changed me, but it's not typical me. I am a fairly over-controlled, as I said before, obsessive compulsive, you know, kind of person. And this is completely the opposite. I suspect that's probably one of the appeals, is that it's different for me. It's not my usual, as I said, over-controlled, neurotic, you know, obsessive kind of style of life. Speaking of obsessive compulsive and details, I don't know what to say about this. This was just a photo. I saw a photo of this factory. I've been doing, I was into drawing abandoned factories, you know, sort of dilapidated, falling down buildings and factory buildings. And this photo came up that this sketch is based on. And yeah, I just thought it was interesting.
Is it the interior? Is it the interior of the building?
Yeah, this is some contraption inside a factory building. So yeah, those behind there, those are windows looking out somewhere. I don't even know what it is. I don't know what kind of factory it was or what that contraption was supposed to do. I just liked all the lines and the contrasts, you know, the dark spots on there.
So this is in opposition to the previous painting where you had to challenge yourself to get away from the obsessive compulsive nature of it. This is sort of diving into your obsessive compulsiveness. And it's like, to me, this is sort of like, I don't know, like, you know, giving someone who loves chocolate a giant chocolate cake and just saying, go at it, you know, because this is like, just dive into your obsessions and it's almost like revel in them, which I don't know. It's weird that to me this seems like an indulgence, even though it was a lot of work. I mean, it was a ton of work to do all these little parts and pipes and areas and colors. It was a lot of work, but just from knowing your art, I feel like this was sort of an indulgence, whereas the previous one was, you know, some more challenging, more pressing. Am I wrong?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I hadn't really thought about it, but yeah, I was kind of indulging my interest in all these little details, and yeah, that's an interesting observation. You can see, though, I do try to introduce a little bit of spontaneity there. You can see some of those water-soluble ink lines again, not to the extent in that utility pole thing, but it's still on there. And also those little, see those splatters? You can kind of notice them at the bottom. I've been into splattering too. So you just kind of take the paintbrush and load it up with paint and flick it at the sketchbook, at the paper. And that's a little bit, you know, again, unpredictable, a little out of control. You never know where it's going to go or what it's going to do when it gets on there. So yeah.
It's also very Jackson Pollock-esque.
The little splatters.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like the splatter.
Who do you like? Who are your favorite artists?
Oh Lord, I'm not good at answering that question. There's a woman named Joan Mitchell, an abstract expressionist. I don't know if you're familiar with her work. She does these, I don't even know what to call them. They're really colorful, huge canvases. She's dead. She was part of the abstract expressionist school, you know, in the 50s and 60s. I like Edward Hopper. I like, Matisse. You know, I find myself drawn to paintings with lots of color, really intense color.
Jackson Pollock here, is that your?
I'm not a huge fan of his, but I certainly like it. I certainly appreciate it. Yeah, what are you doing with that back there?
Well, this is part of my art appreciation. I'm a very well-schooled art mind, really.
Yeah.
As
I've
evidenced by
that.
my very astute analysis of your obsessions.
Yes.
That was the first reasonable thing I've ever heard you say about art, so I was impressed by that.
Is that a print or is that an actual Jackson Pollock?
I can tell you it's a print, and he borrowed it from somebody for this occasion. I can tell you that.
If that was an actual Jackson Pollock, I'd be a much wealthier person. No, it is a poster that I've had mounted on some sort of board, and I should have it up on the wall. It's just sitting in a bookcase, but it is mine, and I've had it for a long time.
Wonderful. That's awesome. It's beautiful.
Dr. Brubaker can tell you that I have actually a fair amount of original art in my office. Very interesting art. He's jealous. He's jealous of my art. He won't say that, but I know.
Yeah. The unfortunate thing is he's got it hung upside down. He has one painting in his office, and it's hung upside down. So that tells you all you need to know about Dr. Winslow's appreciation of art.
It's not upside down. It's actually, you would say it was sideways, but not sideways either. And it actually is by a relatively famous artist. It's an original artwork. It's an original oil painting.
Who is that?
The artist's name is Stiefel. You can Google it.
I will Google that. So speaking of, what about this one?
Yeah, there are those lines again. Yeah, I mean, this captures it all, doesn't it? It's got the lines. It's got the sort of that water-soluble kind of thing going on there. It's got the bright colors. These are actually the yellows and reds and blues that you see in there, and I think the green. Those are actually oil pastels. I was sort of experimenting with them. They're really cool. Those are really intense colors, which I like. they're kind of a pain in the butt to deal with painting because they smudge and they get on, I work in a sketchbook, so they get on when you close the sketchbook, those oil pastel colors come out on the page facing the sketch.
Oh yeah.
So I like the way they look. I like the way they feel when you're using them, but they're kind of a pain.
So it seems like, are these newer paintings, these more abstract paintings, or are these just throughout your repertoire?
No, the abstract ones are almost all from the last couple of months. Some of
Okay.
them from the last couple of weeks.
Are you becoming more interested in abstract art?
Well, I've always been interested in it from an art appreciation standpoint, but in terms of doing it, yeah, I have become more interested in it, not to the exclusion of the sort of observational sketching, the urban sketching. I still primarily enjoy doing that, but I can't do much of that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just kind of playing really with this abstract stuff. And as I said, I think I said earlier, I've been studying composition. So some of these abstract things are really just playing around with different compositional ideas, different design, kinds of concepts. This is kind of an L-shaped composition structure, whatever.
Do you think this is part of sort of the natural progression of the maturation of an artist to kind of move toward abstract, or is that's sort of a cliche and maybe represented by Picasso, but not most artists?
I don't really know. I don't know if that's the case at all. And I'm not sure exactly what prompted it, even in me. But I've also listened to approximately 1 bazillion podcasts and watched YouTube videos by artists since we've been locked down. There's a lot more of that on the internet these days, and podcasts. And I actually I was listening to an interview with a pretty famous artist who said exactly what you were just saying. He's a watercolorist, and he's known for these beautiful landscapes mostly. Really cool stuff, really advanced, professional art. And he was saying he's moving more toward abstract work as he's getting older. He's probably in his 60s or 70s now. And he said he finds himself moving more toward abstract art, and his goal is to be doing that entirely.
Ah.
So I don't know if it's an age-related thing or an experience-related thing or where it comes from for me or for anybody else, but apparently it is a thing.
Interesting. If you were to put your psychologist hat on, sort of the content of your painting, what would you say? I mean, we've already talked about your obsessive compulsive tendencies, and then your kind of resistance to free yourself from that. But what would you say about the content of your paintings?
Well, I don't really know. I mean, but the abstract ones, I'm not even sure there is content really. The urban sketching, I don't know. I don't have a good answer to that question. It's probably something as boring as, I like architecture. I like buildings. I like, I like looking at those things. So I guess that's just naturally attractive to me when I'm looking for something to paint. Just the aesthetics of buildings and the architectural details and kind of the heft of buildings and capturing that. So I'm not sure what that has to do, what that means from a psychological perspective. I suspect it's more of just I'm interested in buildings.
Well, I've noticed I have a lot of artwork as well. I have a lot of original artwork. And one of the things that I've noticed is I do like abstract pieces, but my favorite pieces are portraits, whether it's a portrait. And I have, my dog may be the only dog in the world that has actually 2 original portraits made of her. So Claudette has her own little collection, but I have portraits of my bunny rabbits. I have portraits of Secretariat. I have, unfortunately, this is going to sound very, narcissistic, but I have 2 portraits of myself. So what does it say? I mean, do you think it's a sex difference, men versus women? What do you think? Or is it just preference? Or, and I'm curious to know what everybody else is thinking as well. I don't, not just Dr. Brubaker and Dr. Winslow, but what is everybody else thinking about this as well? Anybody?
I think that that like you like building, like painting buildings, which are very structural, and then you use like abstract paintings too, like, and they're very not structural. So I kind of liked how that plays out and how that turns out on the paper. When you're taking something that's more like a standard shape and stuff, like, you know, we're in buildings all the time, and then you're just, I think it's kind of ironic, you know, that you're making them more abstract, and I like it.
Well, thank you. You know, I do notice there's sort of a geometry to these abstract sketches. There's a, you know, the lines and the angles, and which is sort of similar to what you see in a, you know, in sketching buildings. I don't think, I've not noticed any sort of gender difference in terms of painting portraits of people or whatever. It's interesting. I think I mentioned before, I'm sort of an introvert in general, not an especially sociable person, and I don't like painting people at all. So, you know, maybe buildings are safer for me than people as a subject. I don't have the skills to paint people very well, even though I continue to try.
Is it hard to paint people or to draw people?
Yeah, it's hard for me. I mean, it's hard from just a plain old skill level. You know, people are complicated. There's lots of changes of plane, and, you know, a face is a really complicated thing to try and capture just in terms of technical skills. But it also, of course, involves engaging with people for an extended period of time. And, you know, maybe that's something that I'm not especially comfortable with.
Or maybe you just need a vacation from it.
That may be, yeah.
Can I ask a question? I don't want to
Yeah.
stick my nose in this too much, but I've noticed something interesting about Dr. Brubaker's descriptions of his art, and that is that he remembers a lot of details about the situation that he was in when he created the art. And some of these drawings he did several years ago, and he is still able to bring up details about the world around him. At the same time that the point of many of those stories was that he was oblivious to what was going on around him, and that's true, obviously. But the fact that he can remember so many details about the situation, I don't know, somehow it argues against this attentional focus aspect of flow, which really typically means that you block out everything except for what you're working on. So how do you make sense of the fact that not only were you paying attention to those things enough to be aware of them, but you're actually able to remember them later on, as you know, and they're really tied to the painting. So you can look at a sketch and remember where you were, how far away you were from it, what was going on around you then. I mean, those details are not even part of the sketches necessarily, but they're part of your memory of it. So what's going on there?
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. I think there's several things. I mean, some of the things that I remember are things that interrupted that flow state. So I wasn't actually oblivious when I noticed the bus or, you know, the people were behind me. I'll bet it's also a case of some things just kind of registering out of our consciousness. You know, odors, smells. Lots of urban sketcher people talk about this, how, you know, if they've done a sketch of a place, that memory is really vivid for much longer duration than, say, a photograph. So people look at their sketchbooks from years ago and they remember what they felt, what the sounds were, what the tastes were, what the noises were, you know, the temperature. So, you know, maybe that some of this stuff just registers, and maybe that it's the disruptions to the flow state that kind of allow you to remember. Plus there's the before and after. So, you know, like I said, when I was in Lisbon doing that sketch by the urinals, it wasn't until after the kind of official flow period that I was aware of the stench.
Gives a flow a brand new meaning, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
So
Do
what
you
about
think
this painting? I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's I'm not sure what to say about that one either. It's certainly objective. It was a photo. I was looking at a photo of steel mills, and this one caught my eye. I guess one of the sort of, to me at least, interesting things is the paint. You know, clearly the paint is kind of not objective. Those colors were not the colors of those big contraptions there on that steel mill, and the sky was not that color. And so the colors are kind of non-objective, but the line work is certainly objective. So it's kind of a, you know, a abstracted reality, it's abstracted painting as opposed to abstract. This one I love. This is one of my favorite sketches of all time. And, you know, it's got it all. It's got the diagonal lines, it's got the bright colors, it's got the bleeding ink lines, it's got that geometrical structure behind, you know, there's sort of the vertical lines and the horizontal lines, and they cross in what I think is the focal point on the upper right-hand side of the quadrant of the painting, that area with the two blue spots. So everything is kind of directed at that. And again, when I started this, all I really knew is that I wanted that sort of horizontal, vertical convergence there, because again, I've been studying composition, and that's a compositional thing. And I knew I wanted those colors, but the rest of it just kind of came as the painting progressed. There was no, it's just, you know, you get to a point where, oh, clearly this line needs to be here, or that color needs to be there, or that little spray of something needs to be over there. It really is consistent with that that whole idea of flow, of things kind of the process just kind of unfolding. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Again, you know, the lines, the diagonals. You know, when you look at it now, it kind of looks like buildings and their reflection, but that really wasn't what I had in mind at all. It was, again, the compositional thing, that vertical, horizontal focal point, and the rest of it just sort of came. Again, I knew what colors I was interested in using, and I knew I wanted those crossed lines, but the rest of it just unfolds. Yeah, this is the most recent one, I guess, of all of them. This is probably the last one, you'll be relieved to know. I'm not sure what to say about it. It's a little busier than most. There's a lot less white space on this one. I don't really know why, but everything is there, including the spatters at the bottom. Those little white lines that you can see on there, those are what I put on last. And there's no plan. Again, it just seems to be, that's where those lines need to be.
So you just intuitively know where the lines need to go.
Yeah, I mean, at least as far as I'm concerned, that's where they need to go. So yeah, it is. There's no plan. There's nothing really compositionally. It's just, that's where they go.
When you start these abstract pieces, do you see what you want as the end image in your mind before you start, or do you just start laying things down and go from there?
You know, it's a good question. I have kind of a general sense, but the painting often doesn't end up where I thought it was going to go. So even though I might have something sort of general in mind, again, not all the details, but some sort of general plan, usually at least the colors, I have sort of a plan for what they're going to look like. Rarely does it come out that way. That's for this one, for example, this doesn't bear any resemblance to what I thought it was going to look like when I started.
Any other questions for Dr. Brubaker? We're running out of time, folks. So unfortunately, this has been utterly fascinating.
Really?
So
So are there?
Peyton, did you want to say something?
Yes, so I admire that you can get so in touch with this process, and I find it extremely interesting. I had a question though, in both Boniwell and the TED Talk psychologist. I can't pronounce his name. I'm sorry.
Csikszentmihalyi. I think that's how you say it, right?
Yeah, that guy. But they also mentioned that flow can at times go a little bit too far. It can reach a certain point in time where dissociating with yourself and getting in the moment can actually cause more harm than good. Do you think that there's ever been a time where you've experienced flow and it's gone too far?
I don't think so. Certainly not from a psychological perspective. It has gone too far in the sense that I've, been doing a little sketch while cooking dinner, and whatever I was cooking burned up on the stove while I sat there oblivious to it. But other than those kind of really practical disasters that I've had, no. It's interesting though. Yeah, it's kind of like your psychological controls are weakened to the point that you come slightly unglued for a period of time. That's never happened to me.
So I wanted to ask a question about, like, whenever we were talking about how your memories of the events whenever you see the sketches is heightened to a degree. And I was going to ask you if you think that it's because of the detail-oriented nature of, like, sketching something you're looking at makes you in a state where whenever you've broken the concentration with what you're sketching, and it makes you more perceptive to a bunch of the other details around you. Like once you stop focusing.
Yeah, that's an interesting point there. When I'm doing these sketches, not the abstract ones, of course, but when I'm doing the observational sketches, I am really focused on whatever it is I'm sketching. So I'm really paying close attention for an extended period of time. So, if you were in Paris and you were walking by that building with the big gates, you might spend, a minute looking at it. You might snap a photo and move on to something else. But I'm sitting there for an hour and a half or 2 hours staring at that stuff. And, and I'm sitting in that environment with whatever it is that's going on around me. So, if nothing else, it's the length of time and the focus, that sort of external focus that's going on that probably has something to do with it. But yeah, it really is. And again, that fits entirely with the concept of flow. It's a very intense focus on whatever it is you're doing. And in my case, I'm doing something that's in the environment. I'm sketching that building or that scene.
Those are great questions, you guys. Thank you so much. And Dr. Brubaker, thank you so very much for showing us your sketches today. At another time, I had another meeting, but.
Yeah, I very much appreciate being here. As I said, I have nobody to show these sketches to. Nobody will look at my sketches. People run when I get out my sketchbook, people that I know, including Dr. Winslow, I might add. So it has been a real pleasure for me to be able to talk about it and look at them with you guys. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Folks, we are done with class today. I will see you next Monday. And Dr. Brubaker, thank you very much again.